This is Irish Illustrated Insider. Tim Prister, Tim O'Malley, Kevin Sinclair, and all Irish Illustrated group here today on Irish Illustrated Insider. It's Tuesday, July 26th. Welcome back, everybody. We took a 1 week break from a podcast, and we are back in it with a lot going on as camp is about to open in about 11 or 12 days. We know that there's going to be there will be visitors this weekend, about 15 to 20, including a name that has been very prominent on Irish Illustrated here in the last couple of weeks, Austin Novosad. Kevin, the quarterback Novosad, who was verbally committed to Baylor. Your thoughts on him and where Notre Dame is with him?
Yeah, I mean, I think just sort of, talent-wise, he, was a kind of your bona fide four-star quarterback who, attended that Elite 11, did really well there, and was elevated just inside the top 100 with 24/7 Sports. And, so he's a quality quarterback. His coach told me he's 6'3 3/4, 190 pounds, cognizant of the fact he's got to gain weight, those types of things. So good quarterback. In terms of, Notre Dame taking a shot at him here, we're talking about a kid from Dripping Springs, which is in the Austin area. Apparently, learning a little bit more about him, he went to middle school, Jaden Greathouse. He is on a 7-on-7 team with Braylon James. So he has personal relationships with both of those kids. And if you can imagine, he lives in the Austin area. Those are the two superstar receivers in his area, and he knows them personally. So you got to imagine as a kid, he's looking at a couple of schools and Notre Dame's on that list. That's got to be an intriguing option for him, right? And I'm told it really is that way. Also 4.0 GPA student. But, at the same time, there's other things to take into consideration. Is both his parents are Texas A&M graduates. Texas A&M is in the mix. But, get up to Notre Dame. Most recruits, in their first visit, there's some wow factor there. He's a 4.0 GPA student. The academic angle will probably be appealing to him. You look at Notre Dame's offensive line. Then again, I just think those receivers in Greathouse and James, that's got to be really appealing to him.
Tim, you've seen a little bit of Novosad. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I to piggyback what Kevin was finishing with there, I think when you look at the if you're looking at rankings or you're looking at the young receivers coming into Notre Dame that would be coming with him and just prior to him, that's a lot more intriguing than you could have had 8 months ago, where you wouldn't look at any of that as part of the attraction to coming to Notre Dame. I'm always concerned, and I think, Priester, you've talked about this before, when you're that sandwich quarterback, if that ever comes into your mind. I mean, you have 2 years with Tyler Buckner, and then you have CJ Carr right behind you. That makes it.
I think so. Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're saying. It's Steve Angeli's dealing with the same thing. I think we have a question about Angeli.
But Angeli didn't have to deal with Carr upon commitment.
No, that's fair. That's very true. I tend to think that sometimes we in the media and fans in general think about that more than the player himself, because
they're more confident, right?
Than we are. Right. You're exact. Austin Novosad saying, CJ Carr. I mean, I'm starting to presume now that Carr's he's not going to be an early entry. He'll come in the next class, which is why Notre Dame is pushing for Novosad like they are. But I just don't think, I think a guy like that saying I'm Austin Novosad, I'm going to get the jump on CJ Carr or anybody at Baylor or wherever.
Well, he is. I mean, that's that is, I'm sure. And this is the new world, not the new world. This is the world of recruiting properly at quarterback. Is one of the three quarterbacks out of a 3-person class gets recruited over.
Right.
It's the wrong word. It's not the words that you're going to use, but it is.
Yes, and it happens everywhere, and it's a situation that, in order to, if you don't get that bridge quarterback every year, then you're really going to come up short. So
I guess it would be a lot worse. Maybe it'd be worse for Novosad if Tyler Buckner was a true freshman starter coming in, because then there's nothing sold to you other than 3 years of Tyler Buckner.
Right. Yeah. There are commitments coming in. Apparently, Kevin, you said Jaden Greathouse is one. CJ Carr is another. Drake Bowen. And then you have some of the younger guys. We have a flood of information on our website about that. So I kind of want to move forward to Jaden Asbury, who's a guy or Osbury rather. I was near Asbury Park. This is Jaden Osbury. Who's that's a really good player. Really good player, reminds me frankly, a lot like Jalen Sneed in terms of just that athlete, that ability to run, not huge, kind of a, size wise in between a safety and an outside linebacker type guy. He can play, and it sounds like he's going to come to Notre Dame.
Yeah, no, he's, Osbury, he didn't make a junior season highlight reel. So I spent the absurd amount of time it took to go through a whole bunch of game films and basically make my own junior season highlight reel, just so our subscribers could have something to kind of look at. And his speed is outstanding. Like when I watch him, his inside blitz ability is incredible. He had 10 sacks all on inside blitzes as a sophomore. And his ability to go transition from firing downhill to changing direction and sprinting laterally, say on a screen, something along those lines, it's just outstanding. Really, really outstanding speed. But in terms of like the recruiting aspect of it, I talked to a source real close to him about this time last year. And at that time, I was told like his top two schools at the time early in his recruitment were Ohio State and Notre Dame. And a big reason for that was Al Washington was recruiting him from Ohio State. Marcus Freeman was recruiting him from Notre Dame as the defensive coordinator at the time. So, of course, Washington comes on to Notre Dame. And then they add Al Golden, linebackers coach in the latest Super Bowl, James Laurenitis, who he seems almost like starstruck about when he talked to me after a couple of his visits. And one thing I really stands out about him is he's a very, very bright kid and a great student. So being bright, he says, when I talk to him, James Laurenitis, Al Golden, Marcus Freeman, it's not lost on me what these guys can do in terms of developing me to be a professional football player. And then sort of beyond that, this is a kid who wants to study finance. He has, some serious aspirations that way. I hear he's talking to a lot of different people who he met on his official visit about all of that, about the academic side of it all. So, I think Notre Dame's going to land this kid. And I think I guess I would just say he's a better fit for Notre Dame than some might sort of realize he is.
And for our Irish Illustrated subscribers, I mean, you're probably aware that Kevin Sinclair recently put out a story about tracking the start of this high school senior seasons of some of the Notre Dame commits. So we would encourage you to check that out. Tim, you started the series with the insider preview series of talking to beat writers or those that cover Notre Dame's opponents. And I think you've had about five or six of those. What has stood out about any of the teams that you've talked to the respective insiders about?
I think the confidence in Brigham Young's offense, and it's probably hard for subscribers to understand. I think there was a note like, how does BYU do this with recruiting rankings? And obviously you get some older players, veteran guys that are staying 4 and 5 years, and they can be 23, 24 years old. But just I think it's the familiarity of their offense when you're bringing back a quarterback, an offensive line, and your skill position players that you have a starting point. I mean, I don't think BYU sees themselves as an underdog to anybody, and their schedule, like if they beat Notre Dame,
schedule's ridiculous.
It's incredible. Man. You'll have Baylor, you'll have Oregon. I mean, if you get through that, I know where they're going. Like that's a top 4 situation. Now, I don't think they'll get through those 3 teams undefeated, but they do have a chance. And I mean, I think when people see that 8.5 points, and they go, oh, Notre Dame should be able to beat BYU. That is the third hardest game if you don't include situation at all. Like I always say USC is hard because if Notre Dame's good and Notre Dame's playing for something, and if USC is playing for something, or if they're a spoiler, that's a very hard win out there.
BYU's legit. I mean, and again, I try to spend the summer going through these teams and really breaking it down and looking at everything I can and reading everything that I can. BYU's good, man. I mean, they're 21-4. They've knocked off Power 5 conference teams, and it's going to be a challenge. It'll be a unique situation in Vegas. Did you get your flight yet?
No, I've been working on that.
Holy cow, those flights are expensive. Yeah. But I'm all set, and we're looking forward to that. But
I better ask for Irish Illustrated subscribers, since they all want to hear this. Are you flying out Thursday or Friday? I need to know the situation here. What do we?
Me?
Yes, you.
I am set to fly out on Thursday. You can't go to Vegas on Friday with a game on Saturday. and we should be in pretty good hands out there with our Vegas handler out there,
our
right?
handler,
so
right.
yeah, we should be, and he knows who he is when he hears this. But yeah, I mean, we're all looking forward to that. I did want to, I'm kind of hopping around here in segment one because we have questions about all these things, and I did write down the counting down the Irish outrage. You know what I'm talking about, O'Malley? Because I think I think a lot of people want 14 players in the top 10.
They do. They really want Joe Alt in the top 10, though.
They want Joe Alt.
Really want Joe Alt
11. I mean, and I just for those that are familiar with, those that don't subscribe, I don't know, or go to our website, they don't really know. But I mean, we do a counting down the series, and we have 4 people that vote on it. And we take an average, and so all it takes is really one of us.
Yeah.
To have a too high of a ranking or too low of a ranking in comparison to the other 3, and then the number gets out of whack. I wouldn't get too shook up if
I think
and we have a quarterback thing going now. It started with Jack Cohn last year. Like, where are we supposed to rank Tyler Buckner that's never started a game from? Are we supposed to put him ahead of Lorenzo Styles and Cam Hart and Blake Fisher? Well,
apparently we're not supposed to hit him ahead of Joe Alt because that did not go over well.
I guess that's kind of fair, but again, it's an average,
But you know what else is fair? Joe Alt started after, and he did a great job. This is the problem when you rank someone 11 and someone gets mad that they should be 6, and I have to feel like I have to point out a shortcoming to say why I didn't rank him 6. I consider Joe Alt started against 6 of the worst 9 defenses Notre Dame faced, and when he played a really good one at Oklahoma State, that was his worst game. He wasn't a bad player in that game, but he didn't look the same as he did against Virginia or North Carolina. He was just, if he had to start his first start against Cincinnati or Wisconsin, it would have been a rougher look than his first start was, or coming in against Virginia Tech and then playing Carolina USC. That is part of it.
What are some, Kevin, like off the top of my head, I guess I could look at your list, but some of the rankings that you had that maybe don't coincide with us, or
I can pull ours up.
Anger, anger. I don't know.
Anger management.
Okay. For example, Kevin, you had Brandon Joseph 12th. I think I had him 4th. I did have him 4th.
I think with all of this, like the counting on the Irish and some anger questions about where we have guys listed is, there's a lot of really young players there that are very important, but we haven't seen them play a whole lot. And it's difficult, like you were just saying. Where do you rank Tyler Buckner, right? Yep. Even a guy like Joe Alt, he hasn't played a full season.
Or a guy like Blake Fisher. I know that we all think he's going to be great, but I mean, how do you rank something? I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's just a summer series, and you can't.
I want to do our weekly Monday musing spoiler. All right. So Blake Fisher's number 7. He is our highest ranked sophomore. This is relevant. We've been doing this since 19, including 2019. 4 of the 8 highest ranked sophomores ever in our countdown are this year's sophomores. Blake Fisher, Lorenzo Styles, Tyler Buckner, and Joe Alt. The other ones were Kyle Hamilton, number 1 in 2020. Michael Mayer, number 3 in 2021. And then the only guy we could have missed on, I think he got hurt, was we had Chris Tyree in the top 10 last year. Yeah. Obviously, we missed on it for his year. We had Jarrett Patterson in there as a redshirt freshman, first time starting center in the top 14. So Joe Alt, Tyler Buckner, Lorenzo Styles, Blake Fisher. Clearly, we like the sophomores. But, there's good juniors and seniors on teams too. And Jason Adamiola, who has not appeared yet, and Jarrett Patterson, who have not appeared yet, are 23-year-old men. Yeah. And they're going to be good.
Well, really again, it goes back to, it was a situational thing where Notre Dame didn't have a lot of veteran players on offense on the O-line or receiver, and they had some really good players in their freshman class, Blake Fisher, Joe Alt, Lorenzo Styles, and that's why that is.
I do want to comment before we go to segment 2 on a couple more things here real quickly. I had an opportunity to see Notre Dame basketball team practice last Tuesday, and JJ Starling was there, and Ben Allen Lubin was there, and Dom Campbell was there with the returning players, and it's impossible not to be impressed by JJ Starling. I mean, in addition to what we saw him do on the court, he's engaging off of it. He seems very comfortable, relaxed. He can do a lot of things offensively. And And then Van Allen Lubin is, I mean, Mike Bray came out and said there could be 2 freshman starters, and he would be the other one with JJ Starling. And I don't think that, normally at this time when we see it practice, it's like, well, we don't know how the team's going to develop, but it's such a veteran basketball team with 2 standouts like that in the freshman class, plus a Leshevsky who, Tim,
I mean, so impressed by Nate Leshevsky.
Well, I mean, he carries himself in a completely different way than what we were used to.
Tim, do you remember we talked about this about a month and a half ago? That Tim Abramitis struck us that way when he came back from his European tour for his 50th.
He's been around, by the way, recently at Notre Dame.
And then Abramitis tore his ACL in game number 4, and we never got to see what he would really be like. Is that kind of the way Leshevsky kind of strikes you? Is this is all?
Yeah, definitely. And then and then seeing the practice and hearing Mike Bray talk about he's taking more shots than anybody, and that's with Dane Goodwin still on the team. So that I think that's a real positive. I know everybody. There's still going to be some defensive deficiencies at time, and you don't have that true 5-man like you did with Atkinson. So how do they rebound? I think, I really think that there's a legitimate chance that Matt Zona does play this year because you have to have, you have to have a couple big men inside to play. So he's got to get some minutes, and then you can, as Mike Bray says, you can downshift, meaning you put Leshevsky at the 5, and you basically have 4 guards. Goodwin moves to a quote power forward, which, that's not an ideal position for them, but with the way that they approach it offensively, that seems to work very well. More on that in segment 2. And I just, Jack Brannigan was a 3rd-round draft pick, Notre Dame baseball. 3 others joined him. That's a great opportunity for Jack Brannigan. And within the past week, the passing of Paul Duncan, Tim, you covered him, or you were around him.
Yep.
And then Jim Lynch, who was before most people's time. Mine a little bit too. I know he was the captain on the 66 team,
right.
And I never had the opportunity to meet Jim Lynch. I'm a little surprised that somewhere along the 40 years that didn't happen, but you hear nothing but great things about Jim Lynch and what a great captain he was. And Frank Pomerico said to me, I think there was only, Era didn't have a lot of pictures of former players on his desk, but Jim Lynch was one of them. And he was a stud, and he really got things rolling for Era Parsegian.
And the Paul Duncan news is tragic. Obviously, one of my best friends in Atlanta is good friends with Paul Duncan now. Their kids are, family friends. And
oh, wow.
It's an awful situation. Great. I mean, he's already run a triathlon. He was training again.
Yeah.
When he passed I started covering him. If I recall, he came back from missing 08 after everybody had a really rough 07. He had a very rough 07. He missed 08, and I covered him in 2009. When he was a grown up, how you notice guys when you cover a guy who's a freshman.
He became a go-to guy for us, really, interview-wise.
He did. He was a really affable guy and a very likable person.
Segment 2 coming up, burning up the boards.
Thank you for listening to the Irish Illustrated Insider Podcast. If you enjoy our coverage of Notre Dame football, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. Go to irishillustrated.com/support. Your support will help Irish Illustrated continue to be the leader in coverage of Notre Dame athletics.
Segment 2, burning up the boards. We start with a question from Denver Maximus. What are your thoughts on Notre Dame asking NBC for $75 million to remain independent? Even if NBC does not, or even if NBC does ante up, can Notre Dame remain independent and be a part of the college football playoff?
If they are this good and remain this good and trending up and remaining relevant, Notre Dame can always be a part of it. It's when you fall into that wasteland of being a 9-win team that you have no. And I don't mean you can't make it because you won 9 games. Obviously, you can't make it if you win 9 games. But I'm saying, if they're a coveted program, when the next deal comes out, there will be a provision made for Notre Dame. If they're not a coveted program, there might not be a provision made in 2026, 27 for Notre Dame going forward. Right. That's how I kind of view this particular question.
I kind of wonder, it seems like there's a pretty strong will to stay independent, obviously. But I think that when the conversation will start about joining a conference, if that time does come, I think that might be later down the line if college football turns into 2 super conferences. Yeah. I feel like that's when there will be more pressure and need to join that. But when you're trimming down to, if they say for example, trimmed down to 4 conferences, maybe 3. Feels like there's going to be, again, so it'll be that strong will to stay independent, but I feel like if there's 2 super conferences, probably will force their hand. The TV deal stuff, I'm not a thorough expert on all of that, so it's kind of tough to say, but that's my thoughts on it anyhow.
Yeah, I was kind of saying that there would be 2 super conferences, and it depends that Notre Dame has to be in a pole position really to get to kind of finagle its way into something where when it comes to, I think there's always a path to the playoff for Notre Dame. It is, but what if the SEC says, all right, we have 24 teams, we are playing 11 conference games and an FCS school. Now, if the SEC says we're playing 10 conference games in an FCS school, Notre Dame could get an SEC. They can get a Big Ten. They can get another Big Ten, another SEC, and you can make your schedule out of that. But I feel like the super conferences will be mandating more games, obviously, from their conference foes. Just like, I mean, Tim, just think about it like the ACC does in basketball now. It doesn't matter because you have 14 open spots or 12 open spots,
right?
But you don't have those open spots in football.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if it gets to the super conference level. I mean, how do you determine a conference champion? It's not even realistic to do that. But NBC is looking for a broadcast partner in all this. $75 million for them a year for Notre Dame is unreasonable. I mean, it just is. But can you find a broadcast partner? I thought it was interesting. I think it was last week that the Pac-12 and the Big 12, which were kind of talking about a potential of merging there, just kind of abandoned those talks. So I don't know where this goes. But in order for Notre Dame to remain an independent, obviously they would have to match the dollars that the super conferences are talking about in terms of television packages. And right now, what's the number with NBC? Is it 22? I'd heard 15, but I think it was at 22 per year. But we'll see what happens with that. Question from IC Gold: who are this year's picks for the Javon McKinley / Asmar Bilal breakout senior seasons? If Houston Griffith turns out to be the correct answer, I'll pay the bar tab for the podcast crew at the playoff game.
Well, I tell you, that's a well-worded response too, because it probably would be a playoff game. I will tell you that Houston Griffith is not the answer you will hear today. I don't know. He will not be the answer because we didn't expect Asmar Bilal to be the answer either, but he will not be the guy that we offer as the breakout player. So you got to go a not great player that's a senior or junior, right? Or senior or 5th year player.
The criteria is difficult to meet on a yearly basis.
It is. We cover them very closely, but I'm going to go with Tariq Bracy because we like him a lot, and he could be a breakout player, not a decent player. He could be a breakout player. Right.
And I would, Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, for those breakout players, like I was thinking, Zeke Corral, he's a really good chance there. Heading into his senior year, I heard over the weekend he's like up to around 308 pounds. If they do make that move where he, plays at center, I know that, I could see him, having some rough spots early goings, but I think he's the kind of guy where if you stick him in there at center and plug away at him all year long, he's going to improve as they build cohesion going into his senior year. And then another guy, Maris Liufau, I think, obviously he missed his whole year last season, but going into his senior year, I would look back at his game against North Carolina in 2020, the way he flew around the field and, got after the quarterback and the way he affects the passing game through both blitzing and his coverage ability. Those are the 2 guys I think of.
Yeah, I Corral's an interesting pick. And Kevin, we saw a picture of the group of the offensive linemen, and if he can hold that weight, I mean, I think it's pretty clear Corral is bigger than he was. 308, I think, is what the number you said it was. So I think that's an excellent choice. Clarence Lewis has more playing experience than anybody in that secondary.
Yeah.
And I'm not predicting that he's going to be a game by game, snap by snap, consistent cornerback, but he would be a candidate. And before I would pick Houston Griffith, I would pick DJ Brown. But again, the criteria doesn't really match it because he's played quite a bit.
Yeah,
but I would be
that comparison later on in this podcast.
Okay. I would think somebody like a DJ Brown, breakout. I could see him taking his game to the next level before I would name the other safety in that scenario.
Next from Wash ND, It's that time of year for summer intel. Are there any behind-the-scenes updates on how players look or are progressing before fall camp starts?
Kevin, I know you got some, and we've been talking about Tobias Merriweather all summer, right? So that's a gimme. But two guys that I want to mention, Kevin, Benjamin Morrison. I know you got some intel that he had impressed, and then to hear that Eli Raridan was cleared physically completely. I mean, I just think that speaks to, we know he's a unique athlete by the way he plays the game, but to recover like that from a torn ACL, I think that speaks to, once again, to what a unique athlete he is.
Yeah, I mean, he's got some people in his family where, like, his father is involved in, medical, a part of medical sales or medical, industry that deals with recovering from injuries, essentially. And then he's got, his uncle who used to be strength coach and those sorts of things. So he had the right people around him. But who, put that aside, a guy to tear his ACL in January and he's full go here, I think cleared in late June or early July. That's remarkable. But as far as, little murmurs you hear, I think one guy that we probably haven't talked about much is, Jacob Lacy. He's never been ever throughout his college career to date fully healthy through a season. He had shoulder injury early on that it sounded like he wished he'd had surgery on before he'd even started playing at Notre Dame. So he's toughing out multiple injuries. I heard he's 100% healthy, quicker, stronger. He's in like 285 to 290 range. I saw he won, I believe it's called the Workout Warrior Award or whatever it was recently. So I heard some good things about him. And then, you mentioned Merriweather. Like one specific thing I heard from two different people off the top of my head, may have been more, is his speed. Like he's, I heard from basically a parent of a current player. He said, Tobias Merriweather is like more prepared than he expected. But one thing that really stands out is, man, is he fast. Like his speed is much more notable than we kind of expected. And then again, we had to just sort of mention it there, but Zeke Corral, just heard that, absolutely loves Heastand. I think he's taking in that coaching and loving that a lot more than he had previously. And again, up to 308, the weight thing's been a big thing for him, right? And keeping it on, as I think Tim, you mentioned to me yesterday when I told you about that, that's a whole other thing, right? So we'll see how that goes, but he looks good. So Corral, Lacy, Merriweather, and Benjamin Morrison did come up as a guy who, a pleasant surprise off the hop when he first got there, started moving around. So there's some guys.
Tim, I'm interested to see how much Kevin had said, the offensive linemen are really speaking positively about Harry Heastand. Talk to me at the end of August when you've gone through camp.
He was probably a little kinder in spring, huh? When
I would imagine. Even in summer, I would think.
That's true. It changes a little. As we said before, they don't all love Heastand. Just the really good ones that go to the NFL appreciate what he did for them. The rest aren't so high on how that goes, the teaching. But
I would imagine,
we like the good ones anyway, right?
Yeah. I would imagine, however, that he has tried to make adjustments in his overall coaching style, day by day. But he's old school. So Harry Heastand will be Harry Heastand forever.
Irish from A2. Will J.J. Starling have a better freshman season than Chris Thomas did? Thomas averaged 16 points, 8 assists, and 3 boards as a true freshman. And for people remembering Chris Thomas, if you recall, Chris Thomas, the freshman and sophomore, pre-knee injuries and stuff, was quite a player.
He was, and I don't anticipate Starling necessarily matching those numbers of 16, 8, and 3 because he's on a very veteran basketball team. But Mike Brey actually was talking about, freshmen starting this year and bringing Wirtz and Marcus Hammond off the bench, which I think is, and once the first substitutions are made, then it's who's playing the best. We'll get the most time, and then you mix in, a little bit of time to take a blow. But I don't.
So I was looking back because I forgot who I always think of Thomas's sophomore year because that's when they went to the Sweet 16. But remember, his junior year included Ryan Humphrey, Matt Carroll and David Graves. And Matt Carroll was not the first team All Big East guy until his senior year, Thomas's sophomore year. But Thomas was one of 4 guys that averaged over 14 points. Ryan Humphrey, Chris Thomas, Graves, and Carroll. And he had, as always, not a huge bench, but about the same thing when you figure like Swanigan and Torian Jones would get in, Jordan Cornette. But it's a similar situation for Starling, but we did not mention when we went through kind of listing their players how good Cormac Ryan was in his last 3 games of the season. Like, Cormac Ryan was the story of the NCAA tournament for 2 games, how he played against Rutgers and how he played against Alabama. Like, he was an unconscious player. Had they beaten Texas Tech, there'd have been national stories written about him going to the Sweet 16.
Yeah. You know what Starling is, I mean, he's not as Blake Wesley's such a spectacular athlete. He's not as spectacular and as explosive as that, but he's in the neighborhood. Okay.
So and Tim, remember we saw Wesley run at that open practice after other guys were running.
Yeah.
And he just took the whole court in 4 steps.
He looks different than everybody else, but Starling is, I mean, he runs the floor extremely well. He can get in the lane. He can finish with either hand. He has really good vision. I think he's, not that Wesley didn't distribute the basketball, he did, but I think that Starling's got a little bit more of an eye out for it. And he can, and to me, the biggest difference is that he can finish around the basket under control, whereas Wesley is now working out with the Spurs and still trying to learn how to do that exactly. I'm not trying to diminish anything with Blake Wesley,
right?
But JJ Starling, I mean, his basketball IQ is very high, and I'm reading all this into one practice and all the film that I saw of him coming, into Notre Dame, but also talking to Bray and knowing that this is really a very special player. It's really hard to imagine Notre Dame has brought in a Blake Wesley and a JJ Starling in basketball in back-to-back years. I think Starling is going to be a great player at Notre Dame. Whether he will exceed those numbers as he walks into a veteran basketball team as a freshman,
right?
Probably not. Question from Elk Hunting: how do you see Xavier Watts' role in 2022? Is he a compliment to Brandon Joseph? Could he break through in nickel and dime packages? That kid made more plays in limited action than Houston Griffith and DJ Brown did combined in 4 years.
I got to jump in first because he made more plays in limited action than Houston Griffith did in 4 years. He did not make more plays than DJ Brown did.
I totally agree with you.
Everyone has forgotten what DJ Brown did well because he had a particularly ugly looking mistakes against Oklahoma State where he didn't look like a great athlete.
He played extremely well after Kyle Hamilton was injured.
He did. And he did not look like a great athlete. He looked like he was not a good athlete against Oklahoma State, but that's more of a one-off for DJ Brown. I'm not saying DJ Brown's Brandon Joseph 2.0, but I just don't want to group those two together. So the Xavier Watts path is certainly ahead of, like, if he's going to have a path to the field, he could make more plays than Houston Griffith. He has to make sure he makes a lot of plays in camp because the plays Houston Griffith didn't make, sometimes we don't remember that he was there, so nobody else made a play.
Right.
Deep
Watts has to avoid misplays,
of which he had one in the Oklahoma State game as well. And that's why he came right off the field. Yeah.
Griffith, I think he knows where to be and is generally where he should be. But then you have to make plays.
Yeah. And O'Leary was not making excuses. He said, look, if you don't hear his name a lot, that's good. However, he needs to make way more plays. Like, he was totally he needs to make more plays. He didn't make any. All right, here's a breakdown. Ready? I do drive MVPs. Which is I just pick the best 1, 2, or 3 defensive players and offensive players of every single drive on Notre Dame's team, though every drive all year other than garbage time. So if it's the end of the game, I kind of don't do it, or I do it for a separate category so you can see like freshmen. DJ Brown had 8 and Houston Griffith had 1. Third down wins where you're the player that got the team off the field. DJ Brown had 6. Houston Griffith had none. I think not comparable players.
No, they are not. I think DJ Brown, at least in the minds of the fans, is going to be a surprise, productive player for Notre Dame this year. Kevin, your thoughts on Watts and everything that O'Malley and I have been kicking around here?
Yeah, I mean, when I looked at the question, just sort of mulling it over, it's really a difficult question, right? Because you have Brandon Joseph, who's projected to be the star safety, and he's a veteran guy and proven. And then in the other role, you've got 4 guys there: DJ Brown, Houston Griffith, Ramon Henderson, Xavier Watts. So there's going to be a big battle there. And we're going to have to see who kind of rises up in fall camp and who plays well there. But there is no doubt about it. There's a few times where Xavier Watts came in there in the game and he had that, quick instincts, firing at the football, aggressive, physical, great open field tackler, kind of provided a spark. I think we'd all love to see more of that. He's an exciting football player when he sort of gets in that rhythm, right?
He's violent, and the other safeties are not violent. Well, I shouldn't say it about Brandon Joseph. He's violent, and DJ Brown is not violent. And Houston
right. No, I would agree. No, in fairness to Al Cunning's question, I would agree with it from that standpoint. But DJ Brown is, I think, somebody that they're counting on. Hey, and we all love Xavier Watts. I mean, we all love what his potential is, but recognize that he's still in the transition stage from offense to defense.
But to Kevin's point, we all like Ramon Henderson.
We like him too.
Yeah, he's a good free safety too. He's got the speed, right? Yeah. So in the range, I think one thing, I'll just bring this up as a quick side note. I happen to know that like Kyle Hamilton, when it came to which safety he liked playing with, I'd heard more than once. That was DJ Brown, and that fact that it was a simple fact of he's always where he's supposed to be, very assignment correct. He doesn't seem to have like that kind of aggression we see from Xavier Watts, and I don't know if he's sort of taking risks when he's being aggressive, but you got to find those guys who are assignment correct, but are also aggressive. You got to find that balance, right? And we'll see what Henderson offers in that regard and what Watts does, and see who gets on the field more.
Yeah. Tim, we were both there when Henderson gave DJ Brown credit for,
his pick.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I got my interception because DJ Brown told me pre-snap to do this.
Yeah. Which is a nice thing to have on your team, right? Somebody says, hey, run over here and get an interception. It works out great for you.
Yeah. And I realize that when you look at Henderson and even Watts too, and the measurables are a little bit more impressive, I guess, than they are with DJ. I don't want to overplay DJ Brown. He still has a lot to prove, but I think he's pretty well positioned. Question from Irish I was tailgating. If Tyler Buckner is the 10th best player on the team, this goes back to our counting down the Irish. If Tyler Buckner is the 10th best player on the team, but only the 7th best quarterback on the 2022 schedule, which goes to the first rate series,
right?
What does that say about the talent level on the team and the quality of the quarterbacks Notre Dame will be facing this season?
I'm writing about the quality of the quarterbacks and wide receivers in my Monday column. The quarterbacks are quite good because when you have Jaron Hall fourth, that is a heck of a number 4. But Tim, you did not rate Clemson's quarterback ahead of Tyler Buckner. You rated Clemson's quarterbacks ahead of Tyler Buckner. That's kind of what because when you have Cade Klubnik in there, a 5-star.
And I want to, this perception that Uiagalelei is going to just collapse now is crazy. I don't know if you saw the video of Dabo Sweeney talking about that, but I just want to remind everyone, how many games that Uiagalelei had started going into last year? He'd started 2 games out of necessity because of Lawrence's illness.
Apparently he's dropped a bunch of weight too. He's more mobile.
Yeah, he's in great. If we expect him to come into Notre Dame Stadium and lay an egg, hell, he didn't do that 2 years ago. Why would he? I know he struggled last year, and Sweeney himself said he struggled. He had a really, really tough year.
He was unrecognizable from the guy we saw in South Bend.
There's no doubt, but their offensive line was in a shambles and they were playing freshman receivers. And so, you
rated 2 5-star quarterbacks at Clemson ahead of Tyler Buckner, Steve Angeli, and Drew Prine. You didn't rate one guy ahead of Tyler Buckner. There's 2 5-stars. That's true.
But I would have rated, if it was just the starting quarterbacks, I would have rated Buckner behind Uiagalelei because as much as he struggled last year, that's not going to happen this year. And this, I think there's a perception that Clemson lost 3 games last year and Notre Dame beat them 2 years ago. Well, this will be a win. If you don't think that Clemson is going to respond this year big time, I think you're fooling yourself.
Those 2 defensive lines in that game. Go ahead, Kevin.
I was going to say, I have to add this. Let's just say DJ at Clemson, let's just say he's not playing for whatever reason. He's injured or he's having a bad time. That Cade Klubnik is no joke. Yeah. As our resident recruiting film guy, I've watched a whole lot, almost every single one of Austin Westlake's games from last year when I was evaluating Jaden Greathouse. That kid is accurate. He can extend plays. My man, he is an accurate quarterback. He's a playmaker. He's won three state championships, Texas 6A football. He was the number one quarterback in the class for a reason. So, he's a good quarterback too.
And I think Buckner, 2,500 yards, 25 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. I think he's going to throw interceptions.
Yeah, the rushing touchdowns
like
are key
first,
to Tyler Buckner.
And
the rushing touchdowns are absolutely huge.
And there's no doubt about that. But I don't think he's going to throw for 3,000 yards because he's learning. He's got a young receiving core. He's going to run for 600 or so, and score 8 touchdowns or
more. I think he could go over 10.
Yeah, maybe more, but he's going to get picked. I mean, he is going to get picked. He just has not seen enough live bullets in college competition to avoid that. And so I don't know, where should we, if we place him 5th, then he's ahead of Maris Leofile, Brandon Joseph, Blake Fisher.
Right.
There's way too much we don't know. Period.
There's right. And it's not a perfect system, this counting down. We're just doing it for entertainment value through the summer. And we realize it's incredibly subjective. And so the difference between the number 5 player, the 12 player can be very minuscule.
I will go back and find our top 10s. When this one's over, I'll find our 4 years of top 10s. And other than injuries, see who we missed out.
Oh, great. Well, you find it. Don't reveal mine. Thank you.
No, I meant the official.
Oh, okay.
Next from Welch Bryan, 11-12. Are there concerns over any decommits? Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who is in our message board talking recruiting regularly knows that, the guy that there's the most concern about there is Peyton Bowen, of course, and he's visited Oklahoma a few times. His quarterback teammate is a QB commit there, and he's a kid from Texas who knows a lot of football players. And so that quarterback teammate isn't the only kid connected to Oklahoma that he knows. But, he had an official visit at Notre Dame. And one big point, I think, in all of this is coaching staff at Oklahoma, especially, new coaching staff, their relationship with Peyton Bowen compared to Notre Dame's is completely different. Notre Dame, early sort of building a good relationship with him, long time ago, well over a year ago. And that's what he talks about. It's how close he is with all of those coaches. And I wouldn't discount that. On top of that, his mom, his family, pro Notre Dame. And then you'll think about if you were a member of that class, especially that defensive class. I mean, man, it's one of the best classes in the country. You look at that defense, they got top 100 talent at every level, D-line, linebacker, and then back there at defensive back. He's been committed a long time, really close relationship with Marcus Freeman, Chris O'Leary, Chad Bowden. I think they have a good chance of hanging on to him. I think there's a little too much concern there. I hope that doesn't turn around to bite me in saying that, but I think that's the one guy there's some concern about there, and validly, he's visiting Texas A&M and Oklahoma. I think Notre Dame will ride through that though. And then I think, there's a little bit of talk about Keon Keeley, but he really seemed to be walled off from talking to not only the media, but talking to coaches from other schools. I know that Ohio State was trying to get in touch with him to get him to take an official visit in June and just weren't able to do that. I don't know if they were even able to really get in touch with him. So I know there's very, very pro Notre Dame feeling around his coaches at his high school and people around him, that not just the football program, but the school, he needs to go to Notre Dame. So I think they're safe there. So we'll see what happens. These things twist and turn. We'll see if Peyton Bowen visits Oklahoma on June 29th. I know he's invited. He hasn't said he's going. We'll see what happens.
Just to clarify, July 29th, I think you were referring to.
Yeah, that's
right.
Right.
Okay. Let me tie in a question from Play Like Champ 7, and that was, who would be the 2023 recruit Notre Dame absolutely cannot lose? That would be Keon Keeley.
Yeah, that's who I penciled down. You look at that and not just, first started, put aside how talented he is. Look at what they've added to that position. 2020, it was Jordan Botello. He's not playing on the edge. He's playing linebacker now. 2021, it was Devin Alpu and Will Schweitzer. One's off at UCLA. The other's also playing linebacker. So in this last class, it's nice to get Josh Burnham over there. We don't know if he's even going to stay there long-term. There's Aiden Gobira. He needs to gain some weight. So Keon Keeley, he could come in and it would be right when Isaiah Foskey and Justin Ademalola leave. that guy could have a shot at the starting job, or at the very least a heavy rotational gig, right? Gotta line that kid.
And very quickly on defensive end, edge rushers versus safeties. As much as Notre Dame needs safeties, and Kevin, you and I have both written about it and talked about it, and we'd love to upgrade the safety recruiting at Notre Dame. We just talked about DJ Brown, Houston Griffith, Ramon Henderson, Xavier Watson, the playoffs.
Right.
It's because Notre Dame's defensive line is Notre Dame's defensive line, right?
Absolutely. Question from Raffman68. Little has been mentioned about the special teams kicking. What are your realistic expectations?
We need to revisit this in mid-August, right, Tim? Because everything we ever thought about Notre Dame's kicking in 2019 changed by the time we went to Culver and came back to Culver 5 days later. Like we thought, like we do now, this is a problem. Bramblett didn't look good. Dorr did not look good. And all of a sudden, everything was fine.
But that's actually, you're jogging my memory. I hadn't thought about that. I think
Bramblett looked terrible in that.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did not like. I mean, he never had a huge leg. It got stronger as he went along. But and I will say this: I think I just did the first-rate special teams, which encompasses a lot of things. You could conceivably break that down into two categories, but it is this that Blake Grupe was 64 for 86 at Arkansas State. From beyond 40 yards, he converted 60.7% of his field goals. From under 40 yards, he converted 81% of his field goals. So there's a limit on range. He's kicked a 50-yarder. There's a limit on range. And I think once you get beyond 40 yards, which isn't, you'd like to say once you get beyond 50 yards or 45, but I think with Grupe, once you get beyond 40, you've got some issues. So expect a pretty good kicker under 40. Actually, you could even say a very good kicker under 40, but not so much from distance.
That's definitely a concern. You hear about it. It's a concern among the coaching staff. I'm interested to see punter. They brought in John Stott from Harvard, and he's a veteran guy, and so interested to see how the punting situation comes along. But when it comes to wins and losses, it's the place kicking that's the concern. When obviously we'll all be keeping a close eye on that in August.
We get accused sometimes of worrying too much about positions like wide receiver and running back depth and that. When we tried to ask Marcus Freeman what his concern was, and Tim Prister said, "You can't say kicker," he pulled rank and he goes, "Oh, I'm going to say kicker." So that is a chief concern for Notre Dame. And Tim, I think it's fair to say with Blake Grupe, if he's 3 for 3, leaving Columbus from 42, 40, and 39, he's going to be just fine. If he's 1 for 3 leaving Columbus and they lose by 7 or 6, he's not going to be just fine.
You aren't kicking it for Arkansas State anymore. When you
what did Lou Holtz say? Lou Holtz say about Colorado? That ain't no Kansas State. Well, this ain't no Arkansas State in game 1.
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, guys, because I had intended to pare some of these questions back, and we didn't do that. Question from T Mart, the golfer: does the late push for Austin Novosad harm CJ Carr's chances of pushing up to the 2023 class? Why is everyone not remembering Steve Angeli? Is he being overlooked? Was he overhyped as a 4-star?
Kevin, why don't you take this one?
What I kind of heard last month, so June, whether CJ Carr was going to reclassify, it sounded more optimistic at that time than it is now. So back then, it sounded like there was a lot of communication about, okay, how does this happen? What does he need in terms of credits? There's a lot of conversation there going on where it seemed like they're gearing towards doing that. Now, more recently, I'm hearing that it's less likely. Doesn't seem like there's a yes or no on that. So in the meantime, if you're Notre Dame, you just have to keep recruiting quarterbacks, of course, right? So I don't think you necessarily say, okay, they're recruiting Novosad, definitely not happening, but that they have to move forward as though it's not happening, because you can't get left at the altar, of course, right? So I wouldn't take it as a yes or no just on that situation alone. As for Angeli, I think it's just too early to say, right? Kid just got there. Look better in the spring game than we expected. Is he going to be the next Joe Burrow, who was ranked around the same as a high school recruit? Who knows? Not very many do have that kind of success. But again, he looked better than we expected. What do you guys figure?
4-star is different at 365 for Steve Angeli. He's not overhyped. He's properly rated there. I don't think Steve Angeli was ever overhyped by anyone at our website. I just thought we all think could be a quality player for Notre Dame, right? That's not.
I would say that I think he's, forget the 3-4 star. I mean, he's a mid-range quarterback coming in, and I thought he looked pretty damn good in the spring. I mean,
I liked him more in the spring than he did on film. I
agree. And I would have said that before the blue goal game when he led the game winning score. He's got good size. I think he's accurate from what we've seen. He throws a good looking ball. I don't know that he overwhelms with physical traits. But I think that he is a little underrated. And as I think we mentioned in the first segment, when you get caught between the higher hyped quarterbacks, you're going to have that.
Next from Not J to Fell 1. Where would you say Jack Swarbrick sits in the power rankings of the most powerful people in college football?
Well, is anybody more powerful than Greg Sankey in the SEC? I don't think so. I don't know how to rank Jack Swarbrick, but I know that Jack Swarbrick, his national profile among not among Notre Dame fans, but his national profile among the average fan out there, I think during the pandemic year really went up when you started hearing about some of the things that we talked about how he helped contribute to keeping the season alive before, the ACC pulled the plug on that. I was telling you guys, I saw a story from 2019 and it listed the most powerful people in college football, and Paul Feinbaum was on the top 20 list, but Jack Swarbrick was not. So
that has changed.
I mean, our definition of power is a little bit different from one personality or one role to the next.
I mean, he is compared to then. You know how coveted Jack Swarbrick's opinion is on things right now for what Notre Dame will be doing in the future.
Yeah,
that it's a meteoric rise, and hey, you know what? It might not be that way in 3 years. You might say, hey, he has no power left or something along those lines. But right now, he is more powerful than Paul Feinbaum. How's that? I'm going to go on a limb.
Yeah, just by a little bit.
He was back then, too.
Yeah, he was back then. Question from JRIX68. Which player from the Counting Down the Irish series who didn't finish in the top 10, who has the best chance to end up there by the end of the season? We've kind of walked on.
Well, clearly it's Joe Alt. I mean, for crying out loud, it's going to be lucky if Michael Mayer can hold him off here at this point, from what I've read. So, but no, really, Joe Alt at 11 and Riley Mills at 12 and Justin Adamiola at 13 are the first ones that come to mind.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Chris Tyree at 15 certainly has the potential.
I penciled him down I penciled down Tyree myself because he's going to have a huge role, right?
And that was those rankings were pre Jadarian Price and not pre Logan Diggs, but we might on May 1st not have been totally informed that Logan Diggs would miss 3 to 4 to 5 games.
Yeah.
We're just thinking, that's too bad he got hurt.
Well, how about, you mentioned him earlier, Tim, Tariq Bracy at number 20. If he lives up to the billing that we heard Chris O'Leary give him, he's in line for a really, really good season. I'm gonna push this a little bit faster here, Tim, if I could. No, go ahead, finish up, and then I'm going to throw in the last question.
No, I'm just going to, at our own expense, we are sometimes accused of the only people that overrate Justin Adamiola. He actually finished higher in our postseason countdown at 11 last year than he did in our preseason countdown. And you and I are the number 1 and number 2 Justin Adamiola backers. So there's one guy that could go back in.
There you are. Final question from Murphy 324. How much of Marcus Freeman's recruiting success is effort and marketing skill, and how much is a relaxed profile on traits and academics? It's a very good question.
I mean, effort is massively involved in this. Marketing skill is involved. Likability, the it factor that's hard to define, coolness, Notre Dame being good, they're all part of it. But effort and marketing is higher than a cooling down, I think, of focusing on traits and academics. I think they adequate or properly focus on academics, maybe less on traits. I'm guessing that. I want Kevin to answer that on the traits.
Yeah,
part.
Kevin, that's why I want to ask you, Kevin. I mean, do you see a diminished emphasis on traits and academics?
I don't at all. And I just sort of piggyback what sort of Tim said there. I don't think I'd have really much more to add.
Well, I mean, it's all encompassing.
Yeah.
With
yeah.
Marcus Freeman. I don't, you know,
let's give
I mean,
credit though. Effort's one, right? I mean, effort's one.
Well, no doubt. And it's a great question. And I think it brings to light the fact that he's good at a lot of these things. And I don't think that they're diminishing traits. I maybe in the initial contact with a prospect, they don't take, traits into consideration as much until you start recruiting them and deciding whether, okay, does this guy fit for us or not. But
I think that narrative is sort of built on like, well, Notre Dame is starting to add these players they didn't typically get before, guys who, would end up at SEC schools or bigger big box schools. And that's not that Notre Dame's reaching into guys who don't fit Notre Dame. No, they're expanding, their reach into players who, top end players who otherwise during the Kelly era wouldn't have sort of realized their fits for Notre Dame, and sort of opening their eyes to that again. So a big distinction there from that to, recruiting kids who don't necessarily fit Notre Dame just because they're talented. I don't believe that that's going on. I think they're expanding their reach to kids who do.
That's it today for Irish Illustrated Insider from Tim Prister, Tim O'Malley, and Kevin Sinclair. Thanks for joining us on Irish Illustrated Insider. Back next week on Monday.